Okay, thank you so much, Mihail. Good evening. I'd like to thank Professor Mihail Green for giving me this opportunity of giving a conference on Ottoman Ego documents as part of Ego Documental seminar series. And I thank you all for joining us. As an Ottoman historian, I see it as a privilege to reflect the position of an Ottoman historian within Ego document research. It has been more than 20 years since I got involved in this work. More than 20 years ago, when I was still a master's student, I translated an article by the Ottoman historian Madlin Zilfi of the University of Maryland from English into Turkish. The title of the article was "The Diary of a Muderris, a New Source for Ottoman Biography." The diary referenced in the title was written by a man named Sıtkı Mustafa. Sıtkı Mustafa was a young scholar and then a judge who died in 1790. So we are talking about an 18th century Ottoman diary. The time span covered by his diary is 1749, 1756, 57. The diary contains 421 entries. The slide you see here shows a typical diary, typical Ottoman diary. The writing is in Ottoman Turkish, a text written in the Arabic script used by Turks until the new Republic of Turkey adopted the Latin alphabet in 1928. From the establishment of the Ottoman Empire in 1299 until 1928, texts were written in Ottoman Turkish. Now I'm showing you another page from the diary. This way, I would like you to get a sense of what the diary looks like. The most distinctive characteristic which gives this diary status as an ego document is the writer's record of his illnesses, his dreams, his clothing and food expenses, and details of his simple purchases, as well as information about his family, in particular his son, Ahmet Faiz. In his diary, it's possible to find the standard information contained in many diaries. The chief of these, of course, is reports on the weather, which are inevitably the first entry in any diary, and that of Sıtkı Mustafa is no exception. It's also possible to trace the incidence of fires, earthquakes, and such disasters in Istanbul. One of the most interesting aspects of Sıtkı Mustafa's diary is the journey he made to Yanina in modern-day Greece, when he was appointed to be a judge, and the 7 months he spent there. This is from December 1754 to June 1755, his dismissal and return to Istanbul. From the diary, we can follow this journey stop by stop. Setting out in November 1754, he reached Yanina after a 17-day journey, passing through a number of locations, intermediate towns, and way stations along the route. I tried to mark the points he passed with a star. Here you can follow. He starts from Istanbul, all the way from Kavala, Thessaloniki, and Yanina in modern-day Greece. During the time he was in Yanina, Sıtkı Mustafa continued to give news from Istanbul. It's often said that those who keep diaries are in many cases individuals whose careers have experienced difficulties. I am of the opinion that the motivation for Sıtkı Mustafa's diary fits well with that of writers of diaries around the world. As I will discuss later, another diary keeper, Sadrettinzade's motivation for keeping a diary appears to have been simply to leave a record on earth, whereas Sıtkı Mustafa's motivation seems to be that of someone who had faced injustice in his career. The basic difference between Sıtkı Mustafa, the basic difference actually between them is that Sıtkı Mustafa started to write his diary when he was young, at the start of his career. It was easier for him to face any unjustness as a person who had not yet attained an established status in his career. Sadrettinzade, however, only began to keep a diary at the age of 44, when he had already attained the status of higher ranking judge, that is Mevleviyet in Ottoman Turkish. Naturally, he was more guarded in what he wrote down his diary. At this point, it's time to discuss a very important, relatively new finding. While my doctoral student Semra Çörekçi was writing her dissertation, she discovered another diary authored by Sıtkı Mustafa's grandson, Sıtkızade Mustafa Hamit Efendi. Here is the text you see. Sıtkızade Mustafa Hamit was a judge in Eyüp, a district of Istanbul, in Egypt and in Mecca. An examination of Mustafa Hamit's diary showed that the extent to which the grandson's diary resembles his grandfather's is astonishing in terms of both content and form. Length, around 40 folios each. Duration of diary keeping, 7 years. Number of lines on each page, around 10 to 20. Calligraphy, and to some extent dating. This shows that the grandson knew of his grandfather's diary, and more importantly, thought that writing in such a genre was worthy of being continued. I care about this grandfather-grandson issue of being diary writers for the following reason. Here, we are confronted with a certain awareness. The practice of keeping a diary within the same family appears to me as an indicator of a genre. I began my talk with Sıtkı Mustafa for a particular reason. The article on Sıtkı Mustafa that I translated was actually the first publication of my academic career. So it seems that whether I was aware or not, I had an interest on ego documents from the very beginning, because among the many articles I could have translated, I specifically chose to translate and publish Madeline Zilfi's piece. I did not lose this interest in such materials as I moved forward in my career. For my doctoral dissertation, I turned to a completely different topic. I wrote my PhD on material culture and consumption in early 18th century Istanbul. I problematized the notion of the tulip age, a 20th century conceptualization. Tulip age was accepted as a period of cultural awakening in early 18th century Ottoman Empire. Yet even while writing this dissertation on the history of consumption, the sources of cultural history were always circulating somewhere in the back of my mind. And while working on this dissertation, I came across another very important diary, a diary belonging to Sadrettinzade Telhisi Mustafa Efendi, you see on the screen. He too was a scholar and a judge. Our author was a member of the Sadrettinzadeh family, a scholar family. He had been judge in Sofia, in modern-day Bulgaria, in Manisa, in Anatolia, in Diyarbakir, in Üsküdar, a district of Istanbul, and Plovdiv, again in modern-day Bulgaria. The text consists of 335 pages. The diary has an interesting background, even though it initially covers the years 1711 to 1735. In 1810, it came into the hands of a man called Sadık. He began to write in the diary from the point where Sadrettinzadeh left off. Not content with keeping his own diary in Sadrettinzadeh's, he makes various comments at the side of Sadrettinzadeh's own entries. The diary is to be found in the Ottoman archives in Istanbul. This is surprising how it happened to come into the hands of the state is a mystery, possibly as a result of a confiscation process. The page you see in this slide is one on which he took very dense notes. He does not take notes this extensively every month. Let me explain a bit about the format of this diary. He does not take notes, I said, this extensively every month. I'm going to show you other pages, but first I would like to say that every page represents a month. The parts you see written in red ink at the top of the page indicate the month. Here. The page you see on the right is pre-divided into 30 days. The same goes for the page on the left. So in this slide, you are seeing entries for 2 months. One on the left and one on the right. On these pages, as you see, he preferred to write less. It depends a bit on his mood and a bit on where he is. If he's experiencing interesting things wherever he happens to be, this gets reflected more in his diary. This is the last page of the diary. At the bottom of the page, you see a note here. This note belongs to the person named Sadık, who, as I mentioned earlier, somehow came into possession of the diary about 100 years later. In the note, he mentions that Sadrettinzadeh has died. As you can see, the page on the left is blank. And now, these are entirely blank pages. Sadrettinzadeh is no longer there. Here, however, you can see a new diary inside the same notebook. You are seeing examples of a page on which Sadık took relatively denser notes. As I mentioned a moment ago, Sadık not only continues keeping his own diary, but also reads Sadık's diary and comments here. You see here on some entries. His comments are usually, here you see the comments, are usually about financial matters. Another comment here, another comment here, and another one is here. The comments are usually about financial matters. In these consecutive images I showed you, the places where Sadık makes such remarks, if Sadrettinzadeh makes a financial comment about something, Sadık responds by saying something like, "Come on, look now, we are in an even worse financial situation." Here you see a shorter note by Sadık. This diary eventually became my habilitation thesis. I published a book on 2013 entitled The Judge and His Diary, Kadı ve Günlüğü in Turkish. After publishing the book and receiving tenure, I did not initially intend to continue working on ego documents for many years. However, at this stage, some students approached me expressing their interest in writing thesis on ego documents under my supervision. In this way, a circle of students formed around me. Today, a quite number of students are writing thesis on this topic with me. A few years after publishing The Judge and His Diary, I began to revisit the diary of Sıtkı Mustafa, and I developed a project around this material. I submitted the project to TÜBİTAK, the Scientific and Technological Foundation of Turkey, and it was awarded funding. I carried out the project at the Freie Universität Berlin. Both Freie Universität and Berlin contributed immensely to my work because there I encountered the accumulated experience of a long-running Selbstzeugnisse project under the direction of Claudia Ulbrich. Meeting the team and exchanging ideas with them was extremely valuable for me. After my 1-year TÜBİTAK fellowship in Berlin, I became an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow, and within that framework, I continued my work on ego documents. As a Humboldt Fellow, my aim was not only to study Sıtkı Mustafa, but more broadly to situate Ottoman ego documents within a global historical context. Since then, I have continued to maintain my academic ties between Germany and Turkey. Just before going to Germany, I founded a research center within Istanbul Medeniyet University called the Center for the Study of Ego Documents. When establishing the center, I had in mind the Center for the Study of Ego Documents and History in the Netherlands. I wanted to create such a center with the idea of being able to collaborate with similar research centers around the world. After the establishment of the center, we began carrying out activities under this umbrella. And I learned yesterday that a Center for Self-Narratives was established at the University of Lodz by Mihail Green with 2 other colleagues, and I am pleased to learn this. In the meantime, I also began organizing international academic meetings on ego documents. In 2020 actually, and then in 2022, and in 2024, I held 3 major conferences. I organized the first 2 in Istanbul and the 3rd in Skopje in North Macedonia. Leading scholars in the field participated in all 3. In addition to Ottoman specialists, I invited experts from other regions as well. European historians also joined us and shared accumulated knowledge of their fields. I considered it extremely important to bring together global scholarship with the work of Ottoman historians and to access these bodies of knowledge side by side. These meetings naturally produced several outcomes as well. For example, shortly after the first conference, the International Journal of Middle East Studies allocated a special section for us in which we published a roundtable on Ottoman ego documents. The journal also placed a page from Sadreddin Zade's diary on the cover of that issue. We also have an important journal in our field, the Journal of Ottoman Studies, which has been published continuously since 1980s. This journal published a special section, actually a special issue, containing a selection of papers from our 2020 and 2022 conferences. While all these meetings were taking place in 2022, I launched a major research project, again with the support of TÜBİTAK, the Scientific and Technological Foundation of Turkey. A large number of researchers joined our team, and in this way, a research group emerged, what we might call the IGO Documents Istanbul Research Group. Today, this group publishes a journal titled Ceride, which means journal in Ottoman Turkish. The subtitle of the journal is Journal of IGO Document Studies. This journal is not limited to Ottoman studies, but aims to publish on a global scale. We have published 5 issues so far. You see the first 2 on the screen. This is the 3rd. This is the 4th issue. This is the 5th issue. And the last one, the 6th issue, is coming out this month. In that 6th issue, we will also publish a short conference report written by Mihail Green about the IGO Document Conference you held in Vilnius.
That's true.
I also undertook another initiative. After my Humboldt Fellowship ended, I applied to Research Group Linkage Program, which is another funding scheme of the Humboldt Foundation. I established a small research group based at Freie Universität in Germany and paired this group with my research group in Turkey. Within the framework of this new one-year project, which covered the entirety of 2024, I carried out a research in major manuscript collections in Germany, in Tübingen, in Halle, in Dresden, in Munich, in Berlin, in Gotha. I guess that was it. And on December 13, 2024, we held a full day and highly productive meeting at Istanbul Medeniyet University with the participation of our German colleagues. In addition to the publications I mentioned a moment ago, I also have some new ongoing publication projects. One is to publish an edited volume consisting of papers in English presented in our meetings. I would like to submit this to Brill's IGO Documents and History series. We are also prepared.
Welcome.
Say again?
That would be very welcome.
Yes, I hope I will be able to do this. We are also preparing a source book that contains excerpts from IGO document type sources. This is in a very broad and summary form the work we've carried out at Istanbul as the Istanbul Research Group, and the story of how I entered this field and the projects we are currently pursuing. As an Ottoman historian, I also have a few points to make regarding the meaning and scope of the content, of the concept of IGO document. Let me start with the term IGO document and its relation with Ottoman literature. The term, as you know, was first used by Jacques Presser in 1958. Also today, Dutch historians are doing very important works on IGO documents. I have to mention the name of Rudolf Dekker. and he's also a member of this Brill series, Ego Document and History. The concept of ego document is being discussed in European historiography. The discussion is that what can one name the kind of material that is either a diary or memoir or an autobiography or etc. Dutch historians continue to use the phrase ego document as a way to express their gratitude to Jacques Presser. But as far as I can see, most German historians tend to use the term Selbstzeugnis, which is self-narrative. Caspar von Greyer's view is that the term ego document was an unfortunate choice. Caspar von Greyers and those like him are against the concept of ego document. They think that the Freudian idea of ego may not be given to use to us in the early modern self-narratives. In other words, rather than talking about themselves in such texts, the writers give us information on the social environment and life of the community. And there is little room left for individual soul searching. For this reason, in place of ego document, Caspar von Greyers and others prefer to use self-narrative or personal narrative. I am not very convinced by those who argue against the term ego document. In ego documents of the modern period, in fact, also of the present day, people may mention visitors to their houses and their social media rather than themselves. Although some European historians do not consider the term ego document suitable to use for European self-narratives, in some examples of Ottoman ego documents of the early modern period, there is considerable description of the author's inner feelings. I'm going to give one example. Niyazi Misri, a 17th century mystic, does this to an extraordinary degree in his diary. Those who oppose the concept of ego document do so in the belief that there is little opportunity for psychohistorical analysis in material from the early modern period. Historian Derin Terzioğlu from Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, and actually who wrote a PhD dissertation at Harvard on Niyazi Misri, worked on this diary in connection with the concept of ego documents, but I am sure there is a lot in it for a psychiatrist or a psychologist also. It is possible to see all the fluctuations in Niyazi Misri's feelings and his extreme fear of death in this text. There is also the question of the scope of the term ego document. Historians argue as to what the concept of ego document covers. They touch on the problems of widening the scope of the term too much. In the context of Ottoman history, we have problems in connection with both the term and the scope. In my introductory article in the first issue of Ceride, the journal that I showed you a moment ago, I proposed a threefold classification for Ottoman ego documents. The first of this is self-contained ego documents, which means that this self-contained ego documents are individual texts such as diaries, memoirs, or autobiographies written with the sole intention of expressing the self from cover to cover. in self-contained ego documents, the authors do not necessarily have to talk about themselves in every line, nor does each line have to mirror the depths of their inner selves. If, for example, the author is writing a diary and follows the diary format, deviations within the text are acceptable, as long as the criterion of instantaneity is met. And the second category is partial ego documents. With this, I mean history, geography, or any other subject may contain autobiographical material as a limited part of a more extensive text. A text consists of, let's say, 5 volumes and cover various subjects such as rational sciences, philosophy, medicine, chemistry, physics, astronomy, mathematics, geography, etc., or religion or linguistics, as well as history and biography, making it an encyclopedic work. However, the autobiographical parts are not scattered through the text, but are presented as a separate part under the title Autobiography of the Author. I classified this as partial ego document. Although the autobiography constitutes only 3 to 5 folios within the extensive 5-volume, its presence in a separate format is sufficient to classify it as a partial ego document. And the last category, fragmental ego documents. This is the most complex category and the weakest link of all in ego documents. These are texts where the authors mention themselves in various parts of the work, but these details do not constitute a cohesive unit of the text. At first glance and under normal circumstances, we would not include these texts in the inventory, in our ego documents inventory. This is because we know that in one way or another, every text may, unwittingly or not, contain autobiographical elements. Even historic chronicles are no exception to this. To avoid expanding the scope and changing the meaning of the concept to the point of losing its essence, the criterion is as follows. If a work is written with another intention, but the author insists on talking about themselves within it, and this self-mentioning constitutes the majority of the work, when the pieces are put together, we do not ignore such texts. So this is all 3 classification that I would like to mention. I think I am more or less at the end of my time. To sum up, in this presentation, I tried to explain to you how, as an Ottoman historian, I entered the field of ego documents by showing you the texts I was working on when I entered the field. I wanted to give you an idea of what Ottoman ego documents and specifically diaries look like. I wanted to provide information about activities we've carried out and the publications we've produced. I also wanted to give you a sense of our collaborations with ongoing work around the world. I tried to offer some clues that early modern Ottoman ego documents are fully suited to the term ego document and are rich in their potential to reflect the inner worlds of their authors. And I thank you all for listening, and I would be happy to take any questions.